And notice I always go back to pull another little file out. It says strengths and weaknesses across the top. Gather up the information. Now you've finished another folder. Now what we're doing is we're slowly but surely developing a foundation to build our plan on. Now the next step is this all-important area of making assumptions. Now one particular assumption, especially in a non-denominational kind of church, is I think you've got to make an assumption about the health and vitality of your senior pastor. And I've talked this over with Morris Cirillo, Billy Joe Doherty, Dale Brooks, and others. Their church and their ministry is based on the assumption that they remain in good health and are vital. I've raised the issue with these and others of developing a plan on how there's going to be a management team to succeed them. But that's what we talk about as an assumption base. This plan is based on some assumptions. Dr. James Buzzkirk has been a wonderful lifelong friend. We've spent many hours talking about the planning process, and we both have recognized that in an established Methodist church, there's a mechanism for pastors succeeding one another. So perhaps at First United Methodist, as great a job as Jimmy's doing, their overall strategic direction, where they're going to be in the year 2000, the assumption of Dr. Buzzkirk's health, although important, is not as dramatically important as, let's say, the health of Bill and Joe Doherty at Victory Christian. But again, everybody gets a chance to get involved with what are your key assumptions. Your discussion leader comes back and says, let's try to recapitalize those and get those in another folder. Now notice what's happened. Now we've reached the stage where we've got 4 full folders of ideas. We've got a folder full of purpose and mission and vision ideas. We've got a folder full of environmental factors. We've got a folder that's got strengths and weaknesses. We've got a folder now that's got ideas about assumptions. Now what you want to do is take this same group now and create 4 very specific task forces and have them work on each of these. So you'll have a purpose subcommittee. Now the purpose subcommittee, and this is exactly what we did at Victory Christian, they'll take the 4 people that were in on all the planning up until now, and now they'll go add 3 or 4 out of the congregation. They'll add a housewife, a truck driver, a lawyer, a member of the board. You're going to get a cross-section of people, and it's their job now to take all of those ideas and begin refining a purpose statement. We did the same thing a number of years ago under the guidance of Chuck Fair at Tulsa Christian Fellowship. Week after week after week, the Purpose Committee continues to refine and come back and report to the main committee, here's how we're doing on purpose. You take a second committee then, and you create an environmental analysis committee. It takes a lot of work if you decide to do that congregational survey. You've got to develop the survey questions. You can use the survey in the book, but you might want to change some of the questions. You've got to get the survey out to the people. You've got to get it filled out. You've got to bring it back. You've got to get all that put together. So again, you've taken 4 people, or a representative out of the top management group, and you've added 4 or 5 others from the congregation. Now, if you notice what's happening now is you're permeating into the church. You're getting into the ministry and getting other people involved in the plan. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how you get people excited about the plan, and the key is involvement. Those that execute the plan need to be in on the plan. Okay, same thing with strengths and weaknesses. You take another group right out of your top management team, 3 or 4, and you add 4 more. So now you've got another 8-person committee, and they're digging into strengths and weaknesses. Now this is very, very detailed. You want to have your business managers, CPAs, lawyers, controllers type of people on there. You need to do a very detailed financial analysis. The condition of your building. This gets down to looking at the roof. I brought this up in a meeting at First Presbyterian, and it's kind of funny on the side. Every planning meeting I've been in, it seems like every roof in America on every church needs some repair, and very quickly, with great pride, they said at First Presbyterian, our roof's in great shape. And I kind of enjoyed that. But you want to look at even the condition of your typewriters. What are the strengths and weaknesses? What's the condition of this church or ministry? Now, this subcommittee is meeting separately from the main committee. Same thing with assumptions. Now, what you're trying to do before you set specific measurable targets is you're trying to say, we want to look at a good, solid foundation before we put together our game plan. Now, these meetings can go on for weeks and weeks. I remember one day, Billy Joe Doherty, we were in a meeting at the City of Faith here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He whispered on, and we had been at this seemingly forever. And he said, Henry, are we getting anywhere at all? And I whispered back, I said, Billy Joe, this is perfect. You don't want to race through a plan. And of course, I'll say, we worked so hard on it, I was beginning to wonder if we would ever have a plan at Victory Christian. But each subcommittee would come back. It seems that there would be disagreement and discussion. And I'd whisper back to Billy Joe, that's good. Let's hash this out before we set the strategic direction for your ministry. Let's be sure that we know what we're doing before we start putting buildings in place. I'd rather do the discussion in the early going than in so many cases, I see churches and ministries just rush out and start doing something without having thought of anything. And then you get started and begin to realize all the mistakes that have been made, and I see so much waste motion. That's why I strongly encourage you to go through this process. When you think about it, you've got all the time in the world. I have noticed, and it's been my perception, that churches and ministries seem to want to rush into things and get going on things faster than most business and organizational and other nonprofit kinds of areas. I think one of the reasons that the Japanese are so dominant today is because they are cautious, methodical, and they're going to think through the plan before they go into action. And when I look back and see all the mistakes and false direction and waste in churches and ministries, my message, pastors, is, hey, let's slow down a little bit and let's think through what we're doing before we go into action. And that's basically what we're trying to do in the foundational steps. Okay, now we're ready to look at those targets. You know, what are we aiming for? We've set our foundation. Our committees have worked together, and we've tentatively agreed on purpose. We've looked at environmental factors, what's going on around us. We've analyzed our strengths and weaknesses, our plans based on a few specific major assumptions. Now, what are those long-term specific measurable targets? Remember, we started out with that vision, and the vision is meant to be broad-based. It's a dream, it's a picture. Now, the objective setting stage now is to actually paint exactly what the picture looks like. Now, if you think about an archer and think about your church being an arrow, do you want to just let your church, your organization, and your life be like an arrow just shot off into space, and then wherever it lands you say, well, I guess that's where I was meant to be? If you do that, you never quite know what you're going to hit, and once you hit it, you might not like where you landed. What I'm trying to get across in my book on strategic planning in churches and ministries, and the concept we're trying to get across here right now, is let's focus on a specific target. Archers, as we look out into the forest, let's just don't fling an arrow and trust God to say, well, I hope it lands somewhere where it'll do some good. Let's pick a target, then let's confirm every way we can that, God, is that where you want us to be? Let's pray through what we're aiming toward. And the Holy Spirit's going to give us a confirmation. Yes, go for that target. The churches and ministries that have brought prayer into the planning process have worked diligently to create this direction. I've had a sense in my spirit hey, that this plan is on target. Now let's look into some of the areas where you can set some of these specific measurable targets. The first one always seems to be in the area of attendance. That's one thing that you can set objectives. You can set objectives for your first and second services, your Sunday school, your Sunday night services, Wednesday night services. That's one of the things that you can do. Total membership. You can set specific objectives on how big you want your church to be. Now, why is this important? Well, it's critically important because when you set objectives and you're starting to build buildings, you want to be sure that your building and your parking lot are big enough to handle what you're shooting for. Okay, another area you can look into is missions outreach. Set some very specific targets. You know, what do we want to do in the missions area? Don't just take a stab here and a stab there, but have objectives in terms of your whole missions effort. First United Methodist Church at Tulsa has very specific, measurable things. They have annual trips where they go to Mexico and other places. They do a very good job of planning out what they're trying to accomplish in the missions outreach area. In the all-important area of facilities, you've got to make plans to determine what kind of heating system you want, cooling, the budget for running your buildings. You've got to have specific targets, especially in the all-important area for parking. I see in many of the books that I've read on church growth that parking and access to freeways and location are all very important things to think about in terms of church growth. At Mount Zion in South Carolina, Reverend Brad Lewis is being very careful to be sure there's adequate parking as they develop the facilities for their great ministry and great church. The same thing at Calvary Temple. They've got a good plan on how they're going to handle the people. You need to have objectives for your people. One of the things I'd like to compliment back to the Bible in Lincoln, Nebraska on is they've got a well-thought-out 5-year human resource plan. They've got objectives for their people. Of all the ministries and churches that I've worked with, they've got a good, solid people plan. In the surveys that we do on attitudes, we've got a very sophisticated attitude survey that we give to churches and ministries. For the last 7 years, they've consistently scored the highest. Back to the Bible is an exciting place to work. But that's not by accident. They've got well-planned training and activities and other things for their people. In the area of public responsibility, every church must have some public responsibility objectives. You've got to interact positively in the community in which you're operating. Last but not least is this whole area of financial. You've got to have specific financial objectives. And there's a number of suggestions in the book on different areas where you can set these overall specific objectives. You've got to consider all of your programs. You need to have objectives for your children's program, your youth program, your music. Don Ford at First United Methodist Church in Tulsa's got one of the best music programs that I've seen in America. But he's got a well-thought-out plan. Don cares for his people. He listens to his people. It's no accident that First United Methodist has a fine music program. You've got to have objectives for your senior citizens, young adults, people with problems, your lay ministry. The only way you're going to get anything done is when you have these specific targets. Now, here's how you go through the process of setting those targets.